Let's get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome and welcome back to Cafe Oleh. My name is Jay. Here at Cafe Oleh with Nefesh B'Nefesh, we go over the everyday Hebrew you need here in Israel to succeed, whether that is reading and paying your bills, going grocery shopping and reading nutritional labels, keeping up with the news, striking up a conversation, flirting, dating, complaining, all the everyday things you do in your native language in your country of origin, but here in Israel in modern Hebrew. As always, we want to hear from you what topics you'd like us to cover. You can always be in touch with us by email at hebrew@nbn.org.il. That's HEBREW, just so there's no confusion, at nbn.org.il. You can also see all of our previous lessons up on YouTube. Just go to youtube.com, type in Cafe Oleh. You'll see the first thing that shows up is a playlist. You click on view full playlist. We have over 100 videos there with over 17,000 views. That's absolutely amazing. So you can review all of our lessons. This lesson will be up in the next day or so, along with the spreadsheet that we go with. If you're joining us live on Zoom, you can always write to us in the chat window here on Zoom with any questions, comments, or concerns you might have, as well as requests for classes. The Q&A we reserve only for this topic's class, this class's topic rather. If you have any questions while I'm teaching live, you're welcome to write it in the Q&A. I'll only be looking at that and then reviewing the chat after class. To get started, we're going to do something that's a little bit of a review. And I think it's got a very ambitious title. And I like ambition. I think you should all like ambition too, because you're learning a new language or you're improving your Hebrew skills. And we're calling this improving and expanding your Hebrew vocabulary. A lot of this is going to be review. We've done this in the past. Some of this is going to be a review of what we talked about in the last few weeks. We've gotten into a conversation the last few weeks with all the big Israeli Zionist holidays of Yom HaZikaron, Israel's Memorial Day, and Yom Ha'atzmaut, Independence Day, about all the verbs, for example, that have to do with remembering and repeating, reminding, remembering, all of which come from the same root of the difference between theory and practice. Language has lots of laws and structure in order to be able to use it and make it malleable and make it flexible, because language is an organism. It adapts, it evolves with time, just like we do, just like all other species, live species do. We can think of language as alive. And so when we talk about expanding your vocabulary, I'm not asking you necessarily to put in a dictionary under your pillow, although that's, that always seemed to work in high school and college. Why shouldn't it work now, right? No, we're going to look at some creative ways you already know how to expand your own vocabulary. Now, Hebrew has a very limited amount of words. If we put together individual words, and all the words that are created out of compound words, and we'll review that as well tonight, we get somewhere between 70 to 85,000 words. That's the general estimate that the Academy for the Hebrew Language has for the number of words in Hebrew, whereas other languages are much bigger. One of the biggest is the one I'm speaking in right now, English, which is at least 250,000 words. That being said, Hebrew, because it is so logical in how the language operates and is constructed, affords itself to create new words all the time. And we're going to look at some of those words, and you're going to understand through sort of reverse engineering how people got to new words and how you can create new words, as well as how to improve your vocabulary, not just by creating new words, but also understanding when we have words that in English translate as the same, they're actually differently used. So this is also going to require those of you who religiously follow the spreadsheet that I put up, and your visual learners, that's awesome. You're going to need to listen as well. I know some people like to jump through the spreadsheet and say, wait a minute, Jay, you already here. I need you all to listen. That got into the conversation like we did the last few weeks about, wait a minute, but my friend said I can use this verb in the past tense. And I said, in theory, you can. In practice, you'll never hear it. That's a nuance that you need to understand when you're learning how to use a language that's alive. Modern Hebrew is a live language and means it's adapting and evolving just like all other languages around the world. And therefore, the practice isn't always going to, the theory isn't always going to be the practice and vice versa. We're going to look at some great examples of that tonight. So with that, I'm going to share my screen. You're always welcome to screenshot, old school pen and paper. Remember, you will be getting a copy of this spreadsheet along with the video link in the next day or so by email. And if you don't get it by email, you can always look at the YouTube playlist and you can get it as well as download the playlist there. So let's open this up. View full screen. Wonderful. So we're going to do some review. We're going to do some new stuff. So first off, let's get this all out of the way so I can see things. First off, the word for vocabulary. The word for vocabulary in Hebrew is a compound noun. I just talked about compound nouns. We've talked about it before. Compound nouns are simply two or more nouns put together to create a new concept. In this case, we have the Hebrew word otsar and the word milim. Otsar means a treasury. It's the same word that we use in Hebrew to describe the finance minister and the Ministry of Finance. Misrad ha'otsar, literally the treasury office or the treasury office, excuse me, Misrad ha'otsar, and the person who sits at the head of that office is Sar ha'otsar, right, is the treasury minister. Treasury, finance, however you want to call it, otsar means treasure, in the sense of, think of like a treasure chest. Milim, words, right? So otsar milim, your treasure, your trove, your compilation, as it were, of words. That is how we say vocabulary in Hebrew. So we're going to break this down to a couple different categories, because when I say expand and improve your vocabulary, we're going to look at it in different ways. Some ways you're probably already doing and you're very familiar with, some you're not. We're going to start with one I think you're not, especially those at a more beginner's level, which is the majority of our participants usually. We are currently at 252 participants, which is absolutely amazing. Let's jump into it. Think about when you learn any language, or let's do the reverse. Think about those of you who live in countries with a lot of immigrants who are learning your native language as a second language, whether that's in North America and they're learning English as a second language, or in Western Europe, whatever it may be. You tend to lean on the same verbs again and again. These are heavy-hitting verbs. These are verbs that do a lot. In English, we could say those verbs are things like to get, to take, to become, to have. These are verbs you hear all the time. Sometimes they're auxiliary verbs, right? Sometimes we hear them in connection with another verb. Sometimes they're used in a very abstract sense to mean something else, because that's all there is. That's all we can use. This is a great example. In Hebrew, because we have such a finite amount of words, sometimes we can get away with that same action of using one verb for a myriad of different actions, and sometimes we can't. These are verbs you're not going to learn until a much more advanced level of Hebrew, but if you want to keep up with the news, if you want to keep up with everyday conversation, I'm going to cheat the system with all due respect to Ulpan, and there's a lot of respect for the Ulpan system. I'm going to teach you these verbs. It's going to take a long time to learn. The first one you already probably know, lasim. Lasim is a heavy-hitting verb, right? It holds a lot of weight. Simply to put. Right? Lasim, that's all it means. Lasim is to put. I want you to get into your heads, and this took a while for me learning Hebrew as well. Lasim is to put physically, and only physically. You're going to hear it used in an abstract way all the time, but we have a verb for that. What I want you to focus on is lasim for physical. And here's a sample sentence. Efo samta et hamaftechot sheli? Where did you put my keys? Efo samta et hamaftechot sheli? Et is used before a direct object in Hebrew. Maftechot is the direct object, the keys. Where did you put my keys? כבר מחפש להם 10 דקות ולא מצאתי. I've been looking for 10 minutes and I can't find them. A very common sentence in Israel, I'm sure in your own homes as well, in your language of your native language. But in Hebrew, this is what it would sound like. Okay, I use the verb lשים here, conjugated past tense, second person singular masculine. Efo samta, where did you put, masculine, singular, the keys? Meaning, where did you place them? Where did you put them? Okay, it's a physical movement. That's lשים. That has always been the verb lשים that you learned. I'm about to blow your mind. There's another verb in Hebrew that means to put. But it does not mean to be put. It does not mean to put physically or literally. It means abstractly or figuratively or metaphorically. We can conjugate this verb as to put or to place or to cast. The verb is lahatil. Okay. For example, here's a sample sentence. I doubt his conclusions. It's very difficult to trust him. In Hebrew, we want to say ani matil safek. I place doubt. Literally, I place doubt, or I cast doubt on his conclusions. Maskenotav is hamaskenot shelo, his conclusions or his findings. But ani matil safek, literally, I put or I place or I cast doubt. Doubt is not a physical object. If anyone wants to argue with me that, you're welcome to. But for this class's sake, doubt is not a physical thing. It is not keys. Okay, keys I can hold. Doubt I can't. Doubt I can think of. I can conceptualize, but I can't physically hold doubt. That's where this verb lahatil comes in. We use this verb for anything that's abstract. Okay, the rest of the sentence is ani matil safek al maskenotav. I doubt his conclusions. Kashe me'od lismoch alav. It's very difficult or very hard to trust him. Lismoch means to trust. Okay, followed by the preposition al. But our verb here, lahatil, is to put, to place, or to cast abstractly or figuratively. Lehatil sanktiot. If you watch the news, you're going to see this verb used all the time in the news in Hebrew. Lehatil sanktiot, to place sanctions, to put sanctions on something. Lehatil safek, to place doubt on, i.e., to doubt something or someone. It's not that you're going to never hear, sorry for all those negatives there, you are going to hear people say lasim safek. It is incorrect. It doesn't mean, just like I said at the beginning of this class, just because something's incorrect doesn't mean it's not going to be used. That is language. Language is malleable, it's movable, it changes, it morphs. But when we have a verb that's specifically to put or place something in an abstract sense, use it. And again, this is about improving and expanding your vocabulary, not confusing you, not making you more anxious about learning a language. When you can use lehatil, I promise you, you will make friends and win over enemies. You will really impress people if you can use the verb lehatil. Lehatil is, again, our very favorite resource, pe'alim.com. Type in the word lehatil, you'll get the whole conjugation table of this verb. We just don't have the time to go through the conjugation of this whole verb. Okay. But as you see here, with each verb, we're going to go through Hebrew in the middle, transliteration of the verb on the right-hand side, English on the left, and the root, the shoresh of that new verb or the old verb you've always used on the left. Okay, let's get to another heavy-hitting verb, lakachat. Well, lakachat is used so much and oftentimes so incorrectly. The classic mistake that many people make is not understanding, again, how concise Hebrew can be. That we have a verb, a classic mistake of beginner's Hebrew is instead of using the verb to take a shower, lehit kaleach, people will say lakachat miklachat, literally translating the English in their minds into Hebrew. That's absolutely incorrect. To say to take a shower, literally, is to physically hold the shower stall or whatever it is and take it with you on the street. That is not the verb. Lehit kalech is to take a shower, as in to shower oneself, not to physically take a shower and remove it from its installation to another place. That would be the literal translation. Lakachat is used all the time as to take. Right, here is an example, and I try to use in these sample sentences both everyday sentences as well as ones I ripped from famous songs and from headlines in the news. Because you know those are two great sources that we use here at Cafe Oleh to anchor what we're learning into reality and how the language is actually used in modern Hebrew, the news, and popular culture. Here is a very famous song that, and the lyrics begin, there's a previous line before this, but the song is Lakachta et yadi beyadcha. And it repeats over and over again. Lakachta, you took, and I see that my automatic Niku generator did that wrong. Lakachta et yadi beyadcha ve'amarta li. You took my hand. Lakachta, you took, past tense. Et yadi, my hand. Beyadcha, in your hand. Ve'amarta li, and said to me, Dvarim sheroim misham lo roim mikan. Now you can literally translate this as things that you see from there, you don't see from here. And you would be more or less correct. This, however, is an idiomatic expression in modern Hebrew. Dvarim sheroim misham lo roim mikan is best translated as an idiom, as that's easy for you to say. You can understand it in its literal sense. Things that you see from afar, you don't see up close, but it also means that's easy for you to say, right? Given your point of view, that's easy for you to say. This is how we use this verb. Literally to take, physically to take, just like to put. Lasim is to literally physically put something. Lakachat is to literally physically take something. Lakachta et yadi beyadcha. You took my hand in your hand. Okay. Blow your mind, part 2. We have another verb for to take in Hebrew, and that is linkot. Linkot means to take in an abstract sense. Okay. And here's an example. I literally took this from a news headline I found on Google search. Hamashber macharif. Mitzrayim me'ayemet linkot צעדים בשל הרחבת הפעולה ברפיח. Okay, the verb linkot is to figuratively or metaphorically or abstractly to take. Hamashber macharif, hamashber is a crisis. The crisis worsens, colon. Mitzrayim, Egypt, threatens, me'ayemet, linkot sa'adim. Linkot, we said, is to take. Sa'adim are steps. So we can literally translate this as to take steps. We can also understand this to mean to take action, to take measures. But the point is, it's steps in a metaphorical sense, in a figurative sense. It is not to literally take steps, as in I'm taking steps from someone, or I, the country of Egypt, am taking steps down the street. First off, that doesn't even make sense in English. Linkot sadim, to take steps, to take action, to take measures. Bishel הרחבת הפעולה ברפיח, due to or with the widening of the military action in Rafiach. Okay, this was a headline from the news. It was yesterday or the day before. The point, though, is it's a great use of the verb linkot. First off, you're going to hear this a lot in the news, just like that previous verb lahatil. But it means to take in a figurative sense, to take the steps against, or take steps towards, or to take action, or to take preventative measures. Anything that you can't physically hold on to is going to be linkot, as in to take. Okay, 2 great verbs. Again, expanding your vocabulary in this sense. Yes, you have lasim. Yes, you have lakachat. Yes, you're going to hear them used in a figurative, metaphorical sense. I'm telling you to improve and expand your Hebrew vocabulary. Start thinking about these verbs, lehatil and linkot. Okay, let's move on. So the last few weeks, we've talked about lizkor, lehizacher, and laskir. We have a great example we've already gone through in the past before, but it works right here in understanding how to improve your vocabulary to know what words to use when. Lifgosh and lehipagesh, 2 verbs that in English almost all the time get translated as to meet. That is incorrect. The best way to think about these verbs is lifgosh, highlighted here, means to meet, as in the sample sentence here. קבענו לפגוש מחר בצהריים. We're scheduled to meet tomorrow at noon. Kavanu comes from the verb likboa, to fix, to affix, or to schedule something. So we are scheduled. Lifgosh machal betzoraim. We are scheduled to meet tomorrow at noon. Ana tavi et kol mismachim hanidrashim itach. I don't know why my automatic nikud generator, the dots and bars indicating vowel sound, didn't understand that if it was ana tavi, it should also be itach. Bad move. Okay. We're scheduled to meet tomorrow at noon. Ana tavi, please bring, bevakasha lehavi, please bring, et kol hamismachim hanidrashim, all the requested materials, documents, itach, with you. Okay, you've probably all heard this line before in setting up any interview or appointment here in Israel before, especially at the beginning of making aliyah. Great example. Why is the verb here lifgosh? Because it's to meet, and it's to meet specifically in a formal setting, i.e. a work meeting or an appointment. Anytime you're using the verb to meet in English in a formal setting, the equivalent in Hebrew will always be lifgosh. Lifgosh is used for formal and official settings, professional settings, work settings, doctor appointments, whatever it may be, you're going to use the verb to meet, lifgosh. If you want to use the other verb, you're going to only use it in a casual way, not casual as in literally throwing it around, but casual in that what you're talking about describes a casual situation. Friends, family, a date. Lihipagesh, to meet up. And I wrote here specifically to meet up because I wanted to get in your heads. Think of the difference to meet versus to meet up. You would never say to your boss, can we meet up tomorrow? Maybe you are in a very casual work setting, but that is not the verb you're going to use in Hebrew. You're going to use the verb lifgosh. Lehipagesh is best translated as to meet up. Tirtze lipagesh lekafe baboker? Do you want to meet up for coffee in the morning? That's how we're going to use this verb. Lipagesh lekafe, lipagesh im chaverim, to meet up with friends. Okay, but lifgosh, for example, on Channel 12 every Motzei Shabbat, every Saturday night, they have a TV show, just like you have in many other countries, Pgosh et ha'itonaim, meet the journalists, meet the reporters, right? It's not meet up with the reporters over coffee or a drink. It's meet the reporters in the very formal setting of sitting them behind a news desk and reporting the news or reporting behind the scenes of the news. Okay, that's the difference between these two verbs, lifgosh and lihipagesh. Let's do another one. This one's a little bit of a trick, but it's still worth explaining. We have two verbs in Hebrew that are translated into English as to wait, W-A-I-T. We have lechakot and lehamtin. The good news is there really is no difference between these two verbs. Lechakot is the original verb that was used, and you can find it in some of the earlier Hebrew sources. Lehamtin came about both through the influence of Aramaic, the closest living language to Hebrew on the Hebrew language, as well as lehamtin comes from a root, mem taf nun, that gives us the same words, for example, as matun, which is moderate, or limaten, to moderate something, to soften, to ease something. The idea being that to wait means to soften, to quiet down, to slow down, to relax a bit, right? Both of these verbs in modern Hebrew mean to wait. There is no difference between the two of them. The only difference is their usage, and that's what I'm going to show you right now. For the verb lechakot, you've probably heard this verb used before. You're going to use it plenty. חיכינו שעות עד שחזרת אלינו בטלפון, זה בלתי נסבל. Trust me, when we teach our class how to complain, this is a great example of how to complain. We waited for hours for you to get back to us by phone. This is intolerable. Great sentence. חיכינו שעות. We waited for hours. עד שחזרת, until you got back, you returned literally. אלינו, to us, בטלפון, on the phone. זה בלתי נסבל. בלתי נסבל means intolerable, insufferable. Okay? Nisbal is sufferable or tolerable. Bilti nisbal, insufferable, intolerable. That's how we use the verb lechakot. One way we can use it. We could also use it waiting at a bus stop, waiting, all sorts of different things. We can also use the verb lahamtin in the exact same way, but notice the difference in the wording and, more importantly, the conjugation of the verb lahamtin that I use here. Zman hahamtana המשוער הוא 5 דקות. אנו מודים לך על הסבלנות. If you've ever been on an automated phone menu, or you've waited for a natsig shirut, a customer representative, customer service representative on the phone, you've probably heard something akin to this. Don't worry, we're going to go over automated phone menus again in a few weeks, in case you've forgotten that wonderful torture that is the automated phone menu and customer service in Israel. Zman ha'amtana ha'meshu'ar. Zman ha'amtana is a compound noun. Zman, time. Hamtana is the verbal noun of lehamtin, is the act of waiting. Meaning, zman hamtana, waiting time. Meshu'ar is a adjective, meaning estimated. So the estimated waiting time is hu 5 dakot, is 5 minutes. Anu modim lecha al savlanut. We thank you for your patience. Okay, I translated or I conjugated specifically lahamtin into its verbal noun because this is oftentimes how you're going to hear this verb. Okay, hamtana, waiting, the act of waiting. Zman hamtana, waiting time. Tachanat hamtana, waiting station, the station in which you wait, right? Or makom hamtana, the place you wait for a train, let's say, or a bus. Okay, hamtana is simply the verbal noun of lahamtin, and I put it here because there is no verbal noun of lechakot that's commonly used. There just isn't. There is, again, theory versus practice. Technically, because lechakot is a verb like any other verb, you can construct a verbal noun out of it. The reality, the practice of the language is you will never hear it, much less use it. So hamtana is waiting. Lechakot and lahamtin both mean to wait, but we're going to separate these two simply by one of the conjugations of the second verb lahamtin, waiting, the act of waiting. Okay, these are just some examples, but some of the most prominent examples in Hebrew of where we have very specific words for very specific actions. And I want to, again, emphasize this because this is how you're going to improve and expand your vocabulary, by using these verbs that say something very specific and add extra context to your sentences, both spoken and written, and certainly listening. Okay. Let's move on to another topic. We've done this topic before, but we're talking about expanding and improving your vocabulary. We're literally creating new words from existing words. Here's a great example: creating adjectives from nouns. We've talked about this in the past many times. In Hebrew, one of the easiest ways to create a new word is to create an adjective from a noun simply by adding the letter yud at the end of a word. Great example, Israel. Israel, the name of our country. All I have to do is add a yud at the end of this word, and I have Israeli, Israeli. That can be a person, that could be a thing, to describe them being of Israeli origin or nationality or whatever it is. Israeli, Israelit, Israelim, Israeliot. All I have to do is add those suffixes at the end to the original noun Israel, and I've created an adjective. Boom, done. I've created a new word. Israel, Israeli, two separate words, two separate parts of speech. Noun, adjective. Israel, noun. Israeli, adjective. Okay, it's as simple as that to create new words. I don't want that to sound patronizing and when I have this big title of improving and expanding your vocabulary, because it often is going to be that simple. And it's when it is that simple, it really is that simple. Here's a great example. The word in Hebrew for a monster is mifletzet. Okay. Mifletzet, by the way, let me just add that here, is a feminine word. Okay. If I add a yud to the end of mifletzet, I get the word miflatzti. Miflatzti is monstrous. But monstrous, miflatzti, is masculine. If I want to say something monstrous, feminine, miflatztit, plural miflatztim, miflatztiot, right? If I want to describe someone's actions or someone's behavior or just the appearance of something as monstrous, I take the word monster and add a yud at the end. It's the equivalent in English of adding OUS or esk or ish or all those other suffixes we have in English that we simply lob onto a noun and create an adjective. We do the same thing in Hebrew. We have a whole separate class just on this, but it was a good point to bring in together all these different lessons. We have a whole session on create new words. This is included in it because there are other endings, other suffixes we add to words for very specific situations. This is the easiest form. Simply add a yud. Let's look at another one. Nesiut. Nesiut is the presidency, right? It is the office of the president. Nesiut HaMedina, the presidency of the country, right? It's the office, the bearing title of the president of a country, and it's feminine as a noun. But as an adjective, all we have to do is add a yud at the end, and nesiuti, presidential, right? If nasi, these all come from the words nasi, which is president. Nesiut is the presidency, and nesiuti, presidential, right? He acted presidential. Hui naheg beofen nesiuti. He behaved presidentially. There I actually created an adverb, which is a quick preview of our next category here, right? But the point is, again, from a noun that happens to be feminine, I now created an adjective that I can easily conjugate. Nesiuti, nesiutit, nesiutim, nesiutiot, should the need arise. Okay? The point is, each of these times, I'm creating an adjective from a noun. Great example, next one, an important one, especially in Israel or wherever you live. Shchuna. Shchuna is a neighborhood. Okay? Simply a neighborhood. What if I want to say a neighborhood bar? What if I want to say neighborhood park? What if I want to say anything that belongs to a neighborhood without using a made up word in English like neighborhoody or neighborhoodish? You can say that. It doesn't work in English nearly as well as it works in Hebrew. Because if I were to say, Bo nipagesh machal, let's meet up tomorrow. Remember that verb we just talked about? Let's meet up tomorrow. I said, great, where to? Yofi le'an, where to? And I say, ma'im bal shchunati. What about a neighborhood bar? This is how you say a neighborhood bar. You could say, and I'm sure many people are raising their hands right now. Wait a minute, Jay, couldn't you just say a bar shel shchuna? Couldn't you literally say, like we do in English, the bar of the neighborhood or a bar of the neighborhood? Of course you can. Hebrew by default is always wanting fewer words and fewer syllables. I'm happy to repeat that in every class we have. So if you have the option of saying habar shel hashchuna or habar bashchuna, the bar in the neighborhood, versus bar shchunati, we're always going to go for bar shchunati. It's fewer letters, it's fewer words, and it's more compact. The fewer and the more compact, the better in Hebrew, as is always the default. Bar shchunati will always be understood in Hebrew in Israeli society as the neighborhood bar, meaning not just it's in a neighborhood, it has the vibe of a neighborhood, meaning that the people in that neighborhood go to that bar. It doesn't attract people from out of town. Just like a bar shchunati anywhere else in the world would do the exact same thing, or at least that's the vibe it gives. Okay, I could say Beit Cafe Shchunati, the neighborhood cafe, the neighborhood grocery store. Anything I say and turning shchuna into an adjective, shchunati, shchunatit, shchunatiim, shchunatiot, makes it neighborhoodish, neighborhood-esque, neighborhoody, whatever you want to say to make it clear this is belonging to a neighborhood. Okay, this is another close, not the same thing perhaps as our other examples, but it shows how frequently you're going to see this yud at the end of a noun to turn into an adjective, to make an adjective. Okay, it's that common and it's that easy to create new words. Right now, think of a word that is your favorite word in Hebrew, add a yud at the end. If it ends with a hey, simply turn that hey into a taf and add a yud. Okay, any one of them. Shichva is a layer. Shichvati, layered. Tikshoret is media or in communications. Tikshorti, media or communications as a adjective. It's that simple to do. Okay, let's keep going with this. All we have to do is add one thing or maybe two things to create a new word. Instead of adjectives from nouns, we're now going to do adverbs from adjectives. Adverbs we've talked about in Hebrew before as being the one part of speech that is not nearly as logical and as structured and as uniform in its development as all the others. Everything else we can more or less guess. If I dropped a word down with you with no nikud, with no dots and bars indicating vowel sounds, and you know the laws of how Hebrew words work, and we've done classes on that before, you can more or less figure it out. Maybe there'll be some mispronunciation. You'll more or less figure out the meaning. Adverbs, there is no standardized form to create adverbs in Hebrew. Some of them are as simple as tov. Tov means both good and well. How do you know the difference? Context. Shotefet means fluent and fluently. How do you know the difference? Context. Context is going to come up again and again. Sometimes it's going to take the same form, and sometimes it's not. If you are ever stuck and you want to use an adverb, really quick, for those of you who forgot what an adverb is, it describes a verb. Whereas an adjective describes a noun, an adverb describes a verb. You can use one of two words in Hebrew. Be'ofen, row 36, and betzura, row 38. Okay? Two really good words. You can use these all the time, and you will, more importantly, not just use them, you will hear them all the time. Hu mitnaheg be'ofen menumas. He behaves politely. Right? We could translate this as he behaves in a polite manner. But we're talking about adverbs. He behaves politely. Either one is an okay translation, but know that be'ofen or betzura following a verb creates an adverb. You're describing the verb. You're describing the action. How does he behave? Be'ofen menumas. In a polite manner, i.e. politely, right? That ly in English always indicates an adverb. In Hebrew, we don't have the equivalent of ly as a singular form of creating adverbs. We have lots of different forms, but these are the easiest ways to create adverbs in Hebrew that will make complete sense to everyone. The other word is bitsura. Bitsura means shape or form. Sura is a shape or a form. Bitsura is the same meaning as באופן. היא מתייחסת אליי בצורה מכובדת. She treats me respectfully. Okay? As simple as that. Respectful in Hebrew is mechubad. Bitsura is feminine. Let me put in the genders here, and I'll go back and put in the genders for the words before we send this out to you to review on your own and send it out to you. Be'ofen is masculine, and therefore it's followed by menumas. Masculine. Bitsura is feminine. It's therefore followed by feminine adjective. It doesn't mean that the actors in it are masculine or feminine per se. It's just the gender of the words we're using here. Okay, I could easily say, hu mityaches elai bitsura mechubedet. He treats me respectfully using the word surah, which is feminine. There's no correlation between the person doing the action and which word we use here, be'ofen or bitsura. They both mean the same thing. They're both used interchangeably in Hebrew. Just know both of these words, you can create any adverb you want. Therefore, you're creating a new word. Right? In English, politely. In Hebrew, be'ofen or bitsura, menumas, menumeset. Okay. Category 4A and 4B. We've done this before, and I'm going to quickly swap over to show you that we did this back in November. So it's a great, again, reminder for you all to go back and review our lessons. But I'm going to quickly show you what it looks like, just so you see it, and I'll certainly include it in the longer spreadsheet because I want to get to category 5 before I answer your questions and talk about next week's class. So first off, let me switch over to the other one just to show you that we've done it before. And we'll start with verbs. So just a second. There we go. Okay. So those of you who joined us on Wednesday's Cafe Oleh conversations, you know I gave you a preview of the verb lefaspek. And I gave you that one specifically because we've already covered it. It's also one that you'll hear quite a lot. Lefaspek, if you came across this verb, you may not know what it means, and that's fine because it's a brand new word. It was created. Okay? Lefaspek means to add someone on Facebook or to send a message on Facebook. It's a very ambiguous term, but it has to do with Facebook. In Hebrew, you can create new verbs. These aren't standardized. This isn't standardized by any means. The Academy for the Hebrew Language does not approve of this message, right? But the living language of Hebrew in the streets of modern day Israel do take the language and run with it. And that's how we have so many slang words and different uses of the language that aren't necessarily the standardized form of modern Hebrew. This is a great example. How do we take Hebrew grammar, plug in a word that is not Hebrew to create a Hebrew word? In this case, we take the binyan, and those of you who are at a more intermediate or advanced stage know what a binyan is, and we've covered it before. It's one of the 7 forms that verbs take in Hebrew, both in terms of meaning and of declension / conjugation. When you're creating new words, new verbs in Hebrew, you're often going to use binyan PL. PL is the most is the most frequently found binyan in the Hebrew language, I would say. It's also the most flexible because of its vowel pattern, right? Listen to lifasbek. Even though you have silent vowels in there, that like lidaber, allows for a much more fluid and therefore more wide expanse of options. It's not like some of the other forms that are very finite because their vowel pattern is a very specific one. It's not that this isn't specific, it just allows for more variations. And so that's why a lot of the new verbs, quote unquote, new verbs that are created use PL. And you've heard these verbs before. Lifaspek is one of the newest. One of the oldest ones that thank God we don't have to use anymore in Hebrew is lifakses. Lifakses is to fax something, right? Facsimile machines, remember those things? Lifakses. At one point, Israel was the second largest consumer and user of fax machines in the world. And thank God those days are long over. But lifakses is a verb that was created to describe a very Israeli phenomenon of using a fax machine, right? And it used binyan PL to create lifakses. Lisames, to SMS someone. And the most recent one, which I think is the most extreme of them all, le WhatsApp. Le WhatsApp is both to add and to send a WhatsApp to someone. Again, it has to, as you hear, it's a lot of technology. It's a lot of things that are quickly coming to fruition in terms of technology, things that are always developing. But this is a very common way that we create new verbs, is simply plugging in a non-Hebrew word into more or less the pattern that binyan PL has, the fuspec. If you want to create your own, you absolutely could. This is the one you're usually going to use. You might have to explain yourself a little bit, but the way it works essentially is this. You take PL, you condense the non-Hebrew word into its essential sounds. Facebook, for example, as you see here on the left-hand side, I condense into FSBK, right? You can't understand Facebook without that, meaning I took out the vowels and I still get the sense of it. If I looked at FSBK in English, I could more or less understand what that means. That's the same thing we're doing in Hebrew. I can then convert these letters because that keeps the essence of the meaning of Facebook. I convert those into Hebrew letters, plug it into binyan PL, and that's how I get lifasbek. That's how it works. Here's another one. This is an oldie. It's come back into usage, but this is very much a oldie. Lehiz dangif, right? Lehiz dangif means to wander or walk along the streets of Dizengoff. Okay, it comes from a couple different verbs. First off, it comes from a very inappropriate word that I put here on the left. I'm not going to translate it for you. You can look it up yourself. It is part of a curse word in Hebrew. Yes, curse words are part of a living language. It also comes from verbs like lehizdahot, to identify with or to become identified with. Lehiz Dangef uses the hitpa'el binyan, plugs in the essential letters of Dizengoff, right? Dizengoff, and you get Lehiz Dangef. Why is it Lehiz Dangef and not Lehit like Lehit Pa'el? Very simple. Why is it Lehiz Dahot? If the root is, let me write it out here. You can see, Lehiz Dahot. Lehiz Dahot means to become identified with or to become affiliated with. And it comes from the root Zehut, Teudat Zehut, your national ID comes from the same word. Zehut means identity. Okay, Lizahut is to identify. Lehiz Dahot to become identified with. That zayin at the beginning of the word changes the order of the letters, and to make sure that we pronounce it and conjugate it correctly, instead of plugging in literally into hitpa'el, like hitkatev, we have to change it around a bit. So the taf becomes a dalid and it switches places, right? So it's lehiz dahot instead of, I'm not going to say the incorrect form. That's how it works. Okay, lehiz dangef is the same idea, to walk along Dizengoff Street in Tel Aviv. Okay, this is from the 50s and 60s. So if anyone wants to get angry at me, Jay, I don't understand your logic. Folks, I didn't make up these words. Popular Israeli society made up these words, and Lehiz Dangef is from the 1950s. I promise you, I didn't make these words up. I didn't make these words up to confuse you in anything. Okay, these are made by popular Israeli culture, and they've caught on. Lifasbek, if you say lifasbek to a native Hebrew speaker who's attuned with popular culture, I'm not saying someone who doesn't know what Facebook is, to ask them what lifasbek is, they won't know. Just as someone who hasn't been in Tel Aviv in many years, let alone ever, let alone from the 50s or 60s, probably won't know what Lehiz Dangef means. But I didn't make these words up, folks, but I could have, because they follow a pattern each and every time. Just like adding a yud to the end of a word turns a noun into an adjective, or using be'ofen or betzura between a verb and an adjective creates an adverb. If I plug in a non-Hebrew word, or in the case of Dizengoff, a somewhat Hebrew word, into binyan PL or hitpael, I can create a new verb. As simple as that. Okay. We're running out of time. I'm going to include the how to create new nouns in here because we've already covered that in the past. I want to cover one equally important category, which we have yet to discuss in detail. And that's why I want to spend the last few minutes talking about that. And then one last thing before I jump to your questions, and then talk about next week's class, which is this. When we're talking about improving and expanding your vocabulary, and this is often the case when we're learning a language, and in my private tutoring sessions, I often see this as well, is I know the words. Jay, I know the words. I just can't find the words when I'm talking, right? The real time, the practice versus the theory, I get stuck. My tongue gets twisted all over. I don't know what to say. This is the Israeli equivalent of the right? Especially when a not so fluent native Israeli gets on TV in a foreign country and starts speaking in English. Their English isn't so good, and they're trying to come up with words that aren't to put and to take every other word, and they're trying to come up with those very special $10 words or more descriptive English words, and all they can do is that, or in more modern American English, like, or in modern Hebrew, ke'ilu, they're all place fillers. They're not bad. It's your brain telling your whole vocal system, wait a second, I can't remember the word. I need some time, stall for me. That's what that is. It's your brain saying, stall for me, vocal cords. I need to think of what this word is. These three expressions are going to get you to that place. When you can't remember a word, instead of doing or ki'ilu, because I don't want to date or be an ageist whatsoever, but to say ki'ilu means you're in your teens. We don't usually use ki'ilu outside of your teens, maybe your early 20s. It's not the most culturally appropriate thing to use unless you're in that age group. When you can't think of those, you're going to hear and more importantly use one of these three expressions. And you've heard these all the time. The second one here, I know you hear all the time. I certainly hear it all the time. I don't use it nearly enough, and I should. זה עניין של or זה לא רק עניין של. And you'll hear people say it like this. זה לא רק עניין של. Excuse me, right? They're stretching it out as far as they can. זה לא רק עניין של, and then you fill it in. Excuse me, meaning it's not just a matter of, or it's a matter of, right? לא, סליחה, זה עניין של כבוד. It's a matter of respect, right? You can even repeat yourself. That's how it's used. The second one you'll hear all the time, מין כזה. סליחה, זה מין כזה לא מכובד. It's sort of disrespectful. סליחה, זה מין כזה לא מכובד. Excuse me, it's sort of not respectful. That's what we say, מין כזה. This, it's sort of, is how we would translate into English, a sort of, or let me put that A in parentheses to say, when you are looking for a filler, right? Expressions to give you back time in order to find your words is the name of this category, because it really is. You have the vocabulary, you've learned all sorts of new words and how to create new words. Now to actually use them, you need to stall for time. Your brain hasn't caught up yet with your new vocabulary. How do you stall for time? That isn't or like or ki'ilu. It's one of these three. The third one is much more slang. יצא לי להיות פראייר. I became a friar. I became a sucker, right? It forced me to do something. יצא לך צדיק. You became a tzaddik. You became a righteous person for what you did. Or I got to יצא לי להיפגש עם חבר אתמול. I got to meet with a friend yesterday. Right? Again, you can stretch out these words and use them as fillers and or as fillers in order to get to the specific word you want to use. That's what these three expressions are here for. Not just give you more words as your own otsal milim in your vocabulary, but equally important to stall for time when you can't remember the word, because you're going to hear native Hebrew speakers stall for time and use these all the time. Zemin kaze, lo. You'll hear that all the time. Their brain is stalling for time until they come up with the word, right? Thinking aloud, which oftentimes many of us do in our native language. These three expressions will let you do it in Hebrew. Okay, before we get to your questions, I just want to say one last thing. Last week I shared with the conversation group why I do this. We've been doing Cafe Oleh now for almost 7 years now. It started in person, very small here in Tel Aviv, in the then Nefesh B'Nefesh's office. It went online with the start of Corona. We've gone stronger and gotten stronger and larger as a crowd, online as well as recorded all these years. And the reason I do it, I come from a family of educators, but I don't come with a degree in education. I come with a degree in, I guess we'll call that Zionism. I come with a very language inclined brain, and I can learn languages very quickly. But equally, this is my model of Zionism, is to give back and to pay forward my privilege, which is learning language. Because one too often we hear fellow Olim, and especially thinking about this with regards to Independence Day last week, right? One too often Oleh or Olah saying it's too hard to learn. It's too hard to learn. I'd like to think the way I teach, the different ways that I teach, are thinking about you, mainly native English speakers, and how you process language and how you use language, and trying to approach it that way, not from the traditional ulpan or formal education model, which has its own advantages, but instead saying, okay, I know your frustration. I know you want to use this language now. What barriers can I take away from you? Not just from learning the language, but from using the language. What barrier can I take away from you not calling yourselves Israeli? You may not have been born here, but by making Aliyah, you are absolutely an Israeli, and take that away from you and say, okay, I've taken one less barrier. What's next? Just as Nefesh B'Nefesh helps us remove that barrier of paperwork and all the bureaucracy that comes with Aliyah in the way they've streamlined it, and then help us with all sorts of other things, learning Hebrew together, I'd like to think our method is to take one less barrier, saying, I can't be a part of Israeli society because I can't learn the language, or it's too hard for me. I'd like to think we pull that away. One last bit, which unfortunately I can't show on computer, but I'm going to send you the link, is a speech given in Saturday night's weekly vigil here in Tel Aviv with the families of the kidnapped. And one of the speakers, they focused on the captives who are still not only in Gaza, but have dual citizenship. And the mother of a 20-something-year-old, whose name is Andre, who's originally from Russia and made Aliyah by himself. His mother and brother came to visit about 2 years ago and came back again. His mother has been in Israel since October 7th. She's from Russia. She didn't speak a drop of Hebrew. She gave the entire speech, 7 minutes in Hebrew. Yes, she read from a script, but she read in Hebrew. And she says, and this is the part I'm going to send you the clip of, I came here to Israel not knowing a drop of Hebrew, and how important it was for me to learn the language because no one could help me until I spoke the language. No one was willing to help me. And the moment I started learning the language, people helped out. And she says at the Zeh hanitzachon hakatan sheli, ledaber b'ivrit itchem. This is my small victory in all this horror, is to speak Hebrew at the speech with you. And the crowd, doing what I do with you, I certainly was in tears by that point, as was the crowd. I'm not trying to guilt anyone. I know it's hard learning a new language, but we're not just learning any language, and we're not using it for just any purpose. We're learning our language. We're relearning our language, which we've been separated for millennia, for generations, and we're using it to be vital, active, contributing members back to the society we've adopted, right? We weren't given this. We adopted the burden, good and bad, of being an Israeli citizen. All the more reason to learn Hebrew, and all the more reason to hear from you what topics you'd like us to cover and what challenges you have in learning it, so we can take those away from you. We'll find ways, we'll solve them together. But that's very much what commits me to this, what commits Nefesh B'Nefesh and me both to this. With that, let me answer your questions in the Q&A. Before I get to them, for those who are already done, because we're at the top of the hour, first off, Toda Rabah. Second, next week, we're going to talk about quintessential Israeli foods, foods that don't translate so well. Those includes things like cuts of meat. When you are buying meat at the butcher or in the supermarket, the names of fishes, because they are very different from Hebrew to English, as well as other things that don't necessarily translate. Next week will be Lag BaOmer, which is not only a break in the religious period between Pesach and Shavuot, it often is a beginning of the summer season here in Israel. It also happens to be, if I'm not mistaken, soon enough, Memorial Day weekend in the United States, a very different type of Memorial Day. Nonetheless, as we get ready for summer, it's good to brush up on our different foodstuffs, especially those that don't translate well from Hebrew to English, but we'll understand them together. With that, those who want to sign off already, Toda Rabah. Those who want to stick around for your Q&A, we're going to do that right now. So, what is the feminine form of lehatil? So remember, folks, when I talk about, great question, let me pull this up. These verbs, to put, to place, these are infinitive verbs. They are therefore not conjugated. As you see here, I did conjugate it. Ani matil safek. Lehatil is binyan hif'il. You can simply plug this verb, and I'm actually going to do it with you. Instead of telling you it, I'm going to show you how to do this. Stop share. Let me pull up a screen, and let's do it together. How to conjugate this verb. You are going to go to our absolute favorite resource here at cafeolepealim.com. You're going to type in the search lehatil, and here's what comes up. Results for lehatil: to cast, to throw. It also means to lay eggs. The wonder of Hebrew and how finite things get. And here you have the entire conjugation, folks. Present tense, so Metil, metila, metilim, metilot. Past tense, hitalti, hitalnu, hitalta, all the different conjugation here. Okay. Conjugation is all set for you to learn, but is all here for you. Great question. Thank you for asking. Where can one find this Nikud generator? We've talked about it many times in the past. It's called Nakdan, Nakdan, for those who are interested. How do you use bishel? Great question. Bishel, we've talked about before. It's the same thing as biglal, because of or due to. It's simply how you would use it. Bishel is used before a clause, right? Bishel mezeg avir ha-nesia butla. Because or due to the weather, the trip is canceled. We use bishel before a clause in a because situation, right? Or cause and effect. Because of one thing, we're doing something else. It is not used before a full sentence like ki is. Lo halachti latiul ki mezeg avir haya so'el. Right? I didn't go on the tiul because the weather was bad. The weather was stormy. Mezeg avir haya so'el can be considered a full sentence because it is. But if I said lo halachti latiul biglal mezeg havir haso'el, I didn't go on the tiul due to or because of the stormy weather. Right? That's the difference between them. But bishel is used, think of as due to or because of. Someone gives the alternate translation of lehipagesh is to get together. Awesome, great. I just wanted to understand it still means to meet. It's just to meet in a casual setting. But if to get together as lehipagesh makes more sense for you, you do you. Great idea. Thank you for that. Does anyone ever attach suffixes to matzati to mean what they is when they found? I found them because matzati only means I found, or do sound really antiquated? Great question. It's very antiquated. When we use suffixes in modern Hebrew, we're primarily using them at the end of nouns for possession, or for things like shel, right? Sheli, shelcha, shelanu, and so forth, or beiti, my house. But first off, it sounds very formal to do that because that's very ancient Hebrew too, and therefore it sounds more formal. But definitely there is a form of Hebrew. It's much more formal. It's also much more poetic to add these suffixes that are usually direct objects at the end of verbs. I don't teach that because it's very formal. It's very antiquated, as you rightly so put out. But yes, you will find it. It's very rare. Great question. What about matan as a present? I love when you guys do this. I love this because you're paying attention 99%, and the 1% is something you simply didn't learn, and that's great. Lehamtin, sorry, let me find it. Lehamtin is the root mem taf nun. The verb latet, to give, from which we get the word matana, gift, has the root nen, nun, taf, nun. They are not the same words. Lehamtin, hamtana. It begins with a hey, is the word waiting. Matana is a gift. Ha-hamtana, the waiting. Ha-matana, the gift. Two different words, two different shorashim. Mem taf nun gets us lehamtin. Nun taf nun gets us latet, to give. Great questions. I've heard the word rega means to wait. Yes, rega literally means moment. Resh gimel ayin. But when we say rega, we're saying wait a minute or wait a moment. Why isn't neighborhood bar translated neighborhood son? Great question. Another great question. Why is this not neighborhood son? First off, there is no such thing as neighborhood son. If there is, we need to call into question the structure of your neighborhood. Bar in Hebrew is a bar. Bar in Aramaic is son. Remember that Hebrew is not a, sorry to use Harry Potter language, it is not a pure blood language. There are very few pure blood languages in the world that have no foreign influence. Hebrew is a great example. We have a lot of loanwords, like I talked about lehamtin, for example. We have a lot of loanwords from other Semitic languages. The closest one that's still in use is Aramaic. Bar is Aramaic for ben. Okay, but in the context of ani olech labar shchunati or ani shote babar shchunati, number one, context. Context is always your friend when learning a language, folks. It's clear we're talking about a bar and not a son. Second, because we're talking about something very contemporary, we only use bar, meaning son, in a religious context, in a very formal context. We don't use it other than in those contexts. Bar mitzvah or bar mazal, someone who's lucky, literally the son of luck. You can also say ben mazal, and it's totally understood. The point, though, is in the 9.99 out of 10 contexts, bar shchunati can only be understood as a neighborhood bar. Great question. Do you think there will be a lit taktek? Guess what? There already is a lit taktek. You wrote it as if it would be. You did it the way you're thinking. Almost there, right? You took the word. I like this question. You took the word TikTok, transliterated TikTok into Hebrew, and just added a lamed at the beginning. That's a good start, but that is not how this works, right? It's not le Facebook. It's le fasbek. It has to follow the same verbal pattern, the vocal pattern. Same thing here. To TikTok, as in to add or to put something on TikTok, would be litaktek. Even though that verb already exists, litaktek is to tick, right? The sound of ticking, which is where the name, by the way, of the platform came from, if you didn't know that. But the verb in Hebrew is litaktek, to TikTok. How would you know that bar shchunati indicates the neighborhood var versus the bar my neighborhood? Again, same answer as to the previous one, context. The bar of my neighborhood, by the way, absolutely. A neighborhood bar usually is the bar in my neighborhood. It doesn't have to be, right? But there usually is some correlation between the two. But even if it isn't, I know in this context, it's going to be. And I know it's in the context of the rest of this sentence. And even if I mess up, I'm going to get the address or the name of it. So context always plays a role. We're not learning language in a vacuum, nor are you going to use these words in a vacuum. That I didn't give a sample sentence for all these doesn't mean it won't be misconstrued, if that helps answer. Any connection with the shoresh for nisbol and savlanut? 100%. The exact same root. Savlanut, the word for patience, and sovlanut, tolerance, all come from the same verb, lisbol. Lisbol, with the shoresh samech bet lamed, means to suffer. Okay, if it doesn't sound like it's connected, it is. To think about it a little much, also plug it into pealim.com. You'll see all the words that are connected with that root, samech bet lamed. You'll find some surprising ones in there too. Okay. How do you write to add someone on WhatsApp? It's a terrible word. Oh, I hate this one, but I'm going to send it to you only because I brought it up. Le what le what oh, I got to remember how to do this now. Le WhatsApp, I think is how it's spelled. It's either le WhatsApp or le WhatsApp or le WhatsApp. Either one is to add someone on Facebook. This is a verb you rarely will see written, and instead you'll just pronounce le WhatsApp to add someone on WhatsApp. Great question. How would you say as much as possible? ככל שאפשר. ככל שאפשר or כמה שאפשר. Both mean as much as possible. Great question. Is kevan used the same as biglal and bishel? Yes and no. We'll do a review of all those words, and they're great words. They're used slightly differently depending on what follows them. Bishel and biglal are used exactly the same. Kevan she is how we use the word kevan, meaning due to or because of, and it's followed by the preposition she, and then a full sentence. Biglal and bishel are always followed by a clause. One word, two words, but not a full sentence. Be'ofen kavua means regularly. Yes, it's a great use of it. Kavua means fixed. Be'ofen kavua, regularly, at a fixed time, in a fixed time. Okay. So would I ask someone, אפשר לוואטסאפ לי? Yes, absolutely, 100%, wonderful. אפשר לוואטסאפ לי, would you add me on Facebook, on WhatsApp, or could you send me a WhatsApp? Right? אפשר לוואטסאפ לי, both as a question or as a statement. Great, absolutely. Finally, last question. What is the best way to learn Hebrew? Learning to read first, alphabet, or learning words, phrases? You need to be able to read the letters. That's obviously an integral part. So you need to learn the alphabet, and there are great beginner workbooks that teach you how to read and write. That's going to be critical. Once you learn block script, block text, you'll learn how to write and read in script. I would say that's really important. We see the difference, by the way, in people who learn Hebrew through writing first versus people who only grew up speaking it, namely children of Israelis who either moved abroad or whatever. And oftentimes their vocabulary is awesome, and it's real, and they can speak with much more confidence, but they don't have grammar. And they certainly don't know how to spell words. And we've talked about before, spelling in Hebrew is destiny. You cannot mix up spelling, because letters will change the entire meaning of a word. But people who are focused first and foremost on reading and writing often miss the flow of conversation because it isn't necessarily intertwined. I think, though, unless you're living in Israel right now, if you have yet to make Aliyah, learning to read and write is very important. Once you do that, you can start speaking at the same time and getting the phonetics down, but that's just my initial 2 cents. Okay, we got to run. We're way out of time. Thank you all so much for joining. Toda rabah. See you all at our normal schedule time, 8 p.m. next week, Israel time, 1 p.m. East Coast time. And until then, this lesson will be up online in the next day or so. If you join us for Cafe Oleh Conversations, we're going to continue using these new vocabulary words like limkot and le'atil together. And until next week, toda rabah and leitrot. See you all very soon.